Hey, this is Mossy, and in this episode, we're going to be looking at the emotion of desire. And this is going to be a really deep episode because this particular emotion is quite different from all the other ones that have come before it. And once we really learn how to work with this emotion and let it go, we're going to be moving very quickly now up to higher levels. And it's an interesting one because for the first time we've moved out of these more low energy emotions like apathy and grief and fear, where we're starting to become a bit more energized. We're starting to get a bit more movement into our life. You know, as with apathy before, we were kind of just lying there on our faces, and with grief we were mourning our faces out, and with fear, for the first time, we're actually starting to get some energy to change our situation. And we looked at fear last time, so now with desire, for the first time, we have switched from an away motivation to a towards motivation. So get ready for a really powerful episode where you're going to learn and discover how you can begin to get more momentum into your life so that you can start moving towards living and creating the life that you want. So first things first, before I get into the definition of desire, I want to lay the framework so that you can understand just how this shows up in your life and in society. So as a society, we have evolved out of a more religious orientation to a more scientific and technological orientation as time's gone by. And we might think that, you know, we're free from all of the negative aspects of, I suppose, blind religion, where people don't investigate what they believe in and they just kind of accept what they've been told. And we're moving, you know, into this more scientific age. However, there's still a lot of that heritage, that spiritual heritage, which is stuck in our collective psyche that we haven't been able to work through. And so looking back at our, let's say, Christian roots, we had a lot of emphasis placed on denying oneself and not following the passions of the body. This was a very big theme, you know, throughout the time between when Christianity became mainstream through the Roman Empire, all the way up to the scientific revolution. We've got this huge chunk of time where most of the Western world is very heavily influenced by these kind of belief systems. And so as we have gotten to where we are now, there is a collective memory that makes us look at desire in general as a negative thing, as something that's destructive, something that will ultimately lead to our demise. And being that that's the case, we've got a lot of kickback and a lot of inner resistance, each and every one of us, if you were brought up in this society, towards being selfish and going for what you want. So being that that's the case, we've also got a huge amount of marketing, a huge amount of conditioning around the fact that we need to be selfish. That's what all of consumerism is built on, this emotion of desire. That's what all success is built on. And all mainstream success and ways of getting success is built on desire. And so we've got this crazy situation where we're being told to go for it, what we want, and be our best version, and, you know, go for the money and go for the lifestyle, while at the same time we've got this memory of our religious past, which says that we should be more orientated towards serving God and being selfless. So, with that being said, I want you to notice as I read through this how desire manifests itself in your life and maybe what kind of conflicts you could have going on right now. And as we go through this, you're going to be able to start to address some of those and let them go, using the technique that we've already gone over how to do that. So here we go. Desire. This emotion may range from a mild wanting to an obsessive driven craving for something or someone. It's also expressed as greed, obsession, hunger, envy, jealousy, clinging, hoarding, ruthlessness, fixation, frenzy, exaggeration, overambition, selfishness, lust, possessiveness, control, glamorization, insatiability, and acquisitiveness. Never satisfied, never enough, must have. The underlying quality of this emotion is its drivenness. When we are at the effect of desire, we are no longer free. We're controlled by it, run by it, enslaved and led about by the nose by it. Here again, the essential point of freedom is whether we have chosen consciously to fulfill a certain want or whether we are just blindly being run by unconscious programs and belief systems. Desire as an obstacle. There's often a lack of understanding of the function of wanting and desire. The main illusion is seen in the statement, the only way that I'll get what I want is by desiring it. If I let go of my desire, then I won't get what I want. Actually, the opposite is true. Desire, especially strong desire, for example, cravingness, frequently blocks us getting what we want. I just want to pause on that point because this has been such a huge discovery for me when I first understood this. And when I realized that the more I wanted something, the more I was blocking myself from getting it, it kind of shattered this whole paradigm I had. And again, going back to conditioning, from how we're taught to think, from a very young age, we are taught that we get what we want by doing things like throwing tantrums, being assertive, craving after things, and asking over and over until we get something. And we're caught up in this whole illusion that that's what's going to actually make us happy when we get what we want, right? And that's such a big myth. I'll keep going. Why is this so? Actually, the way something comes into our life is because we have chosen it. It was the result of our intention, or we made a decision for it. It's come into our life in spite of desire. The desiring was actually the obstacle to its achievement or acquisition. This is because desire literally means I do not have. So by the very definition of this emotion desire, we're saying I want because I don't have. The whole frame that we're coming from with this emotion is I am not complete in and of myself. I need that thing. I need that stuff. I need that person in order to be complete. And so if you understand the law of vibration, what that's doing is that's going to create more of that in your life. This is a simple example. Let's say, for example, you really want a new car. And so what you do is you get a picture of that car and you basically do everything you can to get together all the money you can, and you work your ass off, and you stay up late burning the candle at both ends, and you borrow money from friends and relatives, and finally you get together enough for your deposit to put on this car, or maybe you just buy the whole thing. What happens after you've got that car? How long does it take you before you realize, oh, that only felt good for a few minutes or a few days, and you know what? I still kind of feel kind of shitty. You know, maybe if I just get some really nice clothes that go with the image of that car, because this is a few models up from what I've ever had before, and so I need to look the part. And so what's next on your mind? Going out and getting some clothes. Going out and buying some Gucci or some Versace and getting clad in that until you look the part, right? Yeah, it feels good for a few days. Hang on a second though. What if you could have the perfect smoking hot partner to sit there in the car with you, right next to you? What about that? Wouldn't that be good? And so this is how the cycle of desire starts to snowball. And unfortunately what happens, or maybe not unfortunately, this is the way it is, every time we achieve one of our desires, it generates bigger desires because of this innate feeling of incompletion that we begin with. So I'm going to keep going. The desiring was actually the obstacle to its achievement or acquisition, our goal. This is because desire literally means I do not have. In other words, if we say we desire something, we're saying that it isn't ours. When we say that it isn't ours, we put a psychic distance between ourselves and what we want. This distance becomes the obstacle that consumes energy. This is how we burn ourselves out in the pursuit of fulfilling our desires. The impossible becomes possible as soon as we are totally surrendered. This is because wanting blocks receiving it and results in a fear of not getting it. This is really subtle stuff here. The energy of desire is, in essence, a denial that what we want is ours for the taking. This is a different way of looking at achieving goals than the one we are used to from the programming of our world. We're used to picturing ambition and success as being associated with hard work and the classic Protestant ethic virtues, back to that religious foundation. These include self-sacrifice, asceticism, great expenditure of effort and endeavor, keeping our nose to the grindstone, tightening our belt, buckling down, and all the grimness of hard work. When we look at this whole picture, it sounds arduous, doesn't it? Well, it is. It involves struggle, and the struggle results from the block we've put in our own way because of desire. Let's compare the arduous lower consciousness way of achieving goals with a higher state of consciousness in which we've acknowledged and let go of the desire, and we're in a freer state. In a freer state, that which is chosen manifests in our life effortlessly. We surrender the emotion of desire, and instead we merely choose the goal, picturing it lovingly and allowing it to happen because we see that it is already ours. Why is it already ours? In a lower state of consciousness, the universe is seen as negative and denying, frustrating and reluctant. It's like a bad, stingy parent. In higher states of consciousness, our experience of the whole universe changes. It now becomes like a giving, loving, unconditionally approving parent who wants to give us everything we want, and it's ours for the taking, or it's ours for the asking. This is creating a whole different context. It's giving the universe a whole different meaning. Again, think about paradigms. How do you see the universe? Is it this stingy parent who wants to discipline and punish us? Is it neutral and just doesn't care? Is it loving and wants to give us what we actually want? Think about how you hold that universe picture in your own head. Although the world may be stingy and hostile to other people, there's no reason why we should buy into this paradigm. When we buy into it, we make it that way in our own life. As we experience the letting go of desires, we begin to see that what we have chosen will come into our life almost magically. What we hold in mind tends to manifest. As we've said before, during times of supposed high unemployment, Some people are not only employed but have 2 or 3 jobs. This was a shockingly new way of looking at the world when it was first encountered. There was the hope that it was true, but also a skepticism that said, this just isn't possible on a practical level. A strict Protestant ethic background made it hard to believe. Nonetheless, the willingness was there to be open-minded enough to give it a try. Here was the initial experience with letting go of desire. So you can let go even of desire. Just let it be. Allow that feeling to be there in your body. And this is what can happen as a result of that. Personal goals were written down, followed by a letting go of the desire for them. It sounds paradoxical, but that's the process. Identify the goals and then let go of wanting them. One goal that had been held in mind for several years was an apartment in New York City. Because work commitments required a lot of commuting and money spent on hotel rooms. A small apartment in the city, a so-called pied-à-terre, would be the economical solution. Apartment in New York City was written down as a goal. When utilizing this way of achieving goals, we include all of the details, as impossible as they may seem to the rational mind to achieve. So the ideal apartment was detailed, reasonably priced, on 5th Avenue in the 70s block, right next to an entrance to Central Park, at least 8 or 9 floors up in the rear so that street noise would be minimized, and not any bigger than than about 2.5 rooms. The next day at work, it was busy as usual, with a big caseload, meetings, and patient visits. In between the meetings and patients, the feeling of wantingness for the apartment would be acknowledged and let go. And as the day progressed, the apartment was actually forgotten. At 4:30 p.m, after the last patient, there was suddenly the impulse to drive into the city. Despite the fact that it was ostensibly rush hour, the road was clear and the drive only took half an hour. The car cruised to about 73rd and Lexington, pulled up to the nearest real estate office. Rather magically, there happened to be a parking space open right in front of the real estate office. The real estate officer, upon hearing the tongue-in-cheek announcement that an apartment on 5th Avenue was desired, looked with surprise and said, "Well, you certainly are in luck. Exactly 1 hour ago, we listed the only apartment for rent on all of 5th Avenue at 76th Street on the 9th floor. It's the rear apartment, 2.5 rooms, and the rent is reasonable. Rent controlled at $500 a month. It's just been painted and you can move in at any time." So we walked over and viewed the apartment. It fit the description of the goal exactly. The lease was signed on the spot. Thus, within 24 hours of trying the letting go technique on a specific personal goal, the goal was a reality. It had been something that was almost impossible to find, and yet it happened exactly as pictured, effortlessly and with no negative emotions. It was an easy and joyous experience. This is not an unusual experience, but a typical one, because in this case, the desire was moderate and could, without much effort, be totally surrendered. By being totally surrendered, this means that it was okay if the apartment happened, and it was okay if it didn't. Because of being totally surrendered, the impossible became possible, manifesting itself effortlessly and rapidly. We can all doubt this mechanism and look back at things we've wanted that were achieved through ambition, desire, craving, and even obsessive, frenzied wanting. The mind says, well, what if I'd let go of the desire for those things? If it wasn't for the desire, how would I have gotten them? I know that I've done that in my own life. I've desired after things and I've put in the work and I've got them. Yeah, you might say that. The truth is, we could have gotten them anyway, only without anxiety, fear of not getting, without all the energy expenditure, without all the effort, without all the trial and error, and without the hard work. Well, the mind says, if we got it effortlessly, well, what about the pride of achievement? Wouldn't we have to sacrifice that? Well, yes, we would have to relinquish the vanity of all that sacrifice and hard work that we put into it. We'd have to give up the sentimentality about the self-sacrifice and all the pain and suffering we went through to achieve our goals. not mentioning any names at all, Gary Vee. This is a particular perversion in our society, isn't it? If we suddenly become successful almost effortlessly, then people are envious. It really annoys them that we didn't have to go through all kinds of anguish, pain, and suffering to get there. Their mind believes that such anguish is the cost that must be paid for success. Well, let's look at this belief. If it weren't for the negative programming that made us believe otherwise, why should we have to go through any of the cost of pain and suffering to achieve anything in our life? Isn't that a rather sadistic way of looking at the world and the universe? Other blocks to the achievement of our wants and desires, of course, are unconscious guilt and smallness. Peculiarly, the unconscious will allow us to have only what we think we deserve. The more we hang on to our negativity and the small self-image that results, the less we think we deserve. And we unconsciously deny ourselves the abundance which flows so easily to others. Have you ever wondered why abundance just seems to flow into some people's lives? That's the reason for the saying, the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. If we have a small view of ourselves, then what we deserve, is poverty, and our unconscious will see to it that we have that actuality. As we relinquish our smallness and revalidate our own inner innocence. Remember how before we were talking about some of the cultural foundations of religious dogma and systems that have been baked into our society? Well, one of those cultural paradigms is that we are born in sin. So we're all guilty by nature. Just by being a human being, you are guilty and you deserve to be punished. And once we can shake that programming off and we realize that we are innocent, we're like a blank canvas, that's when stuff starts to change and we begin to attract more into our life because we're letting go of that smallness. Having, doing, and being. As we free ourselves out of lower states of consciousness such as apathy and fear, we come into wantingness or desire. What was formerly an I can't, and impossible now becomes possible. The general progression of the levels of consciousness as we go from the lowest to the highest is to move from havingness to doingness to beingness. At the lower levels of consciousness, it is what we have that counts. It is what we have that we want. It is what we have that we value. It's what we have that gives us our self-image of worth and our position in the world. Once we've proven to ourselves that we can have, that our basic needs can be fulfilled, that we have the power to provide for our own needs and those of others who are dependent on us, the mind begins to become more interested in what it is we do. Then we move to a different social set, whole different way of being in the world, in which what we do in the world is the basis of our value and how others rate us. So it's not what we have anymore that people judge us by, but it's actually what we do. And I could see this progression in my own life when I moved from wanting to have a career that was extremely lucrative so that I could have all the things that I wanted, to shifting and actually transitioning into things like coaching and social services where I could actually be valuable based on what I gave back to the world. And that's that doing orientation that we transition into. So as we move up in lovingness, our doingness is less and less preoccupied with self-service and becomes more and more orientated to being of service to others. As our consciousness grows, we see that service, which is lovingly orientated towards others, automatically results in the fulfillment of our own needs. This does not mean sacrifice. Service is not sacrifice. So often we got this idea in our heads that, in order for me to give to others, I have to sacrifice what I want. But as we grow in consciousness, these two become one and become aligned so that we naturally want to give to others out of a place of fullness. So this is a different way of helping and sharing and blessing other people than sacrificing for them and making yourself small and destroying your own life so that someone else can be happy. Very different. Eventually, we become convinced that our own needs are automatically fulfilled by the universe and our actions become almost automatically loving. Isn't that amazing? At that point, it's no longer what we do in the world, but what we are that counts. So we've gone from having stuff to being a somebody and, being proud of the fact that we're helping other people and being of service. And as we grow in lovingness up that scale of emotions, now it's all about who we are. We've proven to ourselves that we can have what we need and that we can do almost anything given the willingness. And now what we are within ourselves and to others becomes most important. People now seek our company, not because of what we have, not because of what we do in society's labels, but because of what we have become. Because of the quality of our presence, people just want to be around us and experience us. Our social description changes. We're no longer the person who has a fashionable apartment or big car or a bric-a-brac collection, nor are we labeled as the president of the so-and-so corporation or a member of the board of directors of some organization. Now we're described as a splendid person, as somebody whom people just have to meet, people just have to know. We become described as a charismatic person, someone whose net energy is surplus. They radiate that life and that energy, and people just want to be around them. This level of beingness is typical of self-help groups. In self-help groups, no one's interested in what others do in the world or what they have. They're only interested in whether or not we have achieved certain inner goals, such as those of honesty, openness, sharingness, lovingness, willingness to help, humility, genuineness, and awareness. They're interested in a quality of beingness. Next, we have the topic of glamour. Glamour is a very useful subject to understand. Once we understand it, it greatly facilitates the letting go of desires. And you might be thinking, well, you know what? Maybe my desires do block me from getting what I want, but something about desire just feels good. Do I have to let go of my desires? Well, this actually unpacks why it's going to benefit you so much once you let go of those desires, not just to get what you want, but there's something else. There's some layers of delusion that you're going to break out of. Once we understand glamour, it greatly facilitates the letting go of desires. The book called Glamour, A World Problem, 1950 by Alice Bailey, presents the whole subject expertly. If we look at something we want, we can begin to distinguish between the thing itself, maybe it's that car, versus the aura, the patina, the flash, and the attractive magnetic quality that can be described as glamour. It is this disparity between what a thing is in itself and the glamour that we've attached to it, which leads to disillusionment. So often we've chased some goal and then once we've achieved it, we're disappointed. That's because the thing itself does not coincide with our pictures of it. Glamour means that we've attached sentimentality or we've made it bigger than life. We've projected onto a thing a magical quality that somehow leads us to believe that once we achieve it, we'll magically achieve some higher state of happiness and satisfaction. And an easy example here, you might want to think back to a time when you just had a huge crush on someone. You really wanted to get with that person, maybe make them your boyfriend or girlfriend or have sex with them or whatever it was. And you might remember telling yourself at the time, or you might even be going through this now, that once I get with that person, once I make love to them, or once I can call them my girlfriend and we can have that relationship, I know that I'm going to feel so much better. Yeah? Has that ever happened to you? Or is it just me? This happens very often with vocational goals. The man works year after year striving to become president of the company or become important and prominent in some way. When he gets there, he expects to experience all the satisfaction and the glamour associated with that level of achievement. The kowtowing by employees, sucking up, the flashy cars, the prominent office, the labels, the titles, and the exclusive addresses. But what he finds is that all of these things are superficial. They're very inadequate compensation for the agonizing energy drain and the daily grind that in reality this position necessitates. While he pictured that he would get admiration, what he often finds at the top levels is viciousness, competitiveness, envy, and the endless fawning and dishonest manipulations that occur to people in power, including the paranoid attacks by competitors. He finds that his energy is so drained that he has no energy left over for his personal life. His relationships are impaired. His wife complains that he's too exhausted to make love, too depleted to give her the energy she needs, too worn out to be a good father, and too tired even to enjoy a favorite recreational activity. The same thing occurs with women in the traditionally feminine areas of achievement. A woman thinks, for example, if she gets a certain designer dress for the party, that the dress is going to bring her attention, adulation, admiration, and that it will win her a certain social status. With much sacrifice, she spends a great deal of money and effort on the dress, running back and forth for fittings. But what happens? At the dinner party, there's a few passing comments on her dress, and that's the end of it. Nobody dances with her any more than usual. She's not more prominent than she was before the party. No more genuine attention is paid to her than previously. She gets some hostile, envious looks from other women who recognize what she probably paid for that dress. During the evening, she has the usual argument with her escort, and they go home in the car, barely speaking to each other, the same as in the past. As women make gains in the corporate and political arenas, they face the disappointment that accompanies longed for, glamorized leadership roles in the public. What was predicted to enhance prestige and esteem instead brings criticism, envy, and hostility, even from other women. The experience of achieving their goals is often not what they thought it was going to be. There's an endless judgment of a woman's public persona and dress, and she may have the gnawing feeling of inner worry that she's failed her family by going for professional fulfillment. Winning is sometimes not as liberating as glamour would want us to believe. Emotional goals are also glamorized by sentimentality and emotionalism. A certain excitement is projected onto the emotional event, again with the idea of getting that perfect person, a reunion, a first date, or being elected president of one's class. It's made to seem more important than it really is in the overall course of events. As the event passes, life goes on the same and disappointment ensues. Glamorization is, of course, starkly obvious in advertising. This is a cesspool, a feeding frenzy of glamorization. Here we see it sui generis. The cowboy is the glamorization of masculinity, and the ballet dancer is the glamorization of femininity. Men are attracted by personality, not the brand. Thus, the cowboy represents the glamorized male who is cool, rugged, suave, and in control. The consumer projects onto the product that it will give him those same desired personality traits. Glamorization is living at a fantasy level. Therefore, when we proceed to let go of a desire, we must dissect away that which is exaggeration, fantasy, and romanticization. Once we've relinquished the glamour, it will be relatively easy to surrender the desire itself. If you let go of the romanticization of the cowboy, for example, then the cigarette or the cheeseburger that he was handling in the commercial will lose its appeal. In fact, much to our surprise, we find over and over again that the desire was attached to the glamorous fantasy. There was no reality in it in the first place. Because there was no reality in it, the world is constantly selling us dishonesty, catering to our desire for that romantic, glamorized aspect. It promises to make us more important than we really are. Glamour at that level of dishonesty is a fake. The mind protests. Do I have to give up all that glamorous excitement? Do I have to let go of my pictures of emotional gratification and excitement? The answer is obviously no, you don't. We don't have to give anything up at all. And we can achieve the goals effortlessly and easily once we are conscious of what we are choosing. So you don't have to get rid of the things you want, right? You don't have to deny yourself, like you might have heard in the past, so much. That's not where we're going. We're not going to the point of suppressing desire. That's not what we do at all. Different approach. We can have our goals by becoming conscious of what we're choosing, not desiring, of what we're choosing. And we can have them directly, not through some thing or some relationship or anything like that. We can actually get what it is we're looking for in that thing, in that relationship directly. We can be attractive, but we won't get it in a fake way, such as driving a certain style of car. We'll get it by letting go of our smallness and owning our greatness, thereby reflecting it out into the world. We can easily become that exciting person whom people are eager to know. Just choose to be that person by getting really clear on who that person is and let go of the block of desiring to be that way and any other negative emotions that you have around being that person. We can have what we want directly without detouring through some fraudulent promise that will lead us into frustration and disappointment. The way to become that exciting person whom people want to know is very easy. We simply picture the kind of person that we want to be, and we surrender all the negative feelings and blocks that prevent us from being that. What happens then is that all we need to have and to do will automatically fall into place. This is because, in contrast to having and doing, the level of being has the most power and energy. This is where things come to you more than you going after stuff. When it is given priority, it automatically integrates and organizes one's activities. This one thing, I can't emphasize how powerful this is. And we really need to make allowance for just how powerful our unconscious mind is, really how powerful we are. Because when we start to use these techniques, these higher consciousness techniques to create the kind of life we want, it happens just like it says there. Our unconscious mind, once it has a clear goal and we've let go of all that emotion that's conflicting us and getting in our way, it will automatically get to work on bringing that kind of life into being, bringing us across the kind of people that we need to meet, the kind of opportunities that we need to take. And it'll just do this, it'll just tell you, okay, go there now. You'll just get the urge to go speak to that person, to, type on Google these particular words and click on this particular link, and bang, things start to come into our life. So your unconscious mind is extremely powerful. The reason why, just as a really quick aside, the reason why people get frustrated, and I got so frustrated with things like the law of attraction and the way that that's been taught, is because a lot of people think that it's all mental. It's all about just thinking, what do I want? And they miss this whole deeper part of the iceberg, which is the emotion. This is what creates, this is what manifests, if you want to use those kinds of words. This is what attracts us to the opportunities that give us the things we want without that struggle. So I just wanted to make that distinction between the mainstream ideas of how law of attraction works and how consciousness can work for you once you've cleared the emotions of desire and smallness and the other ones that we've gone through. The power of inner decision. These are not philosophical positions, but practical processes that can be proven through experience. It's easy to experiment with these concepts and watch the automatic results take place. Because of the mind's tendency to want to attribute credit elsewhere, other than to the power of our own consciousness, it's good to keep a diary to write down goals that we'd really like to achieve and then check them off and make follow-up notes. Why? Because it will take a while before we believe it's truly our own power that's accomplishing these ends. And I know that you might be watching this with a skeptical mind going, this is all bullshit. Come on, I've heard this stuff before. I heard this on some YouTube channel where there was some weird spiritual person going on about the law of attraction, and I tried that for a few weeks or a few months, and some things seemed to change, but I think it was just my cognitive bias because I've read about that and I know about psychology, and I know that we have a part of our brain called the reticular activating system, the RAS, which goes around seeking the things that we are looking for. So, Mosse, don't tell me about this consciousness stuff being an effective way to get what I want. I know this science disproves this. This is all spiritual garbage. Really? I encourage you to have a fresh mind, to get skeptical on your own skepticism. Actually look at your skepticism and ask yourself the question, well, why am I so damn skeptical? Am I skeptical because I know that rationality and what I've been taught and science is the truth, because I have conviction and certainty about that? Or is there some other function going on deeper below the surface of the water that keeps me skeptical like this? Is it possible that I could be protecting myself from something? Just a thought. So, here's an interesting example of the denial of inner power. A man who was desperate for a job and pretty frantic about it was instructed on how to apply the letting go technique to his job situation. Because he was of a religious nature, he was advised to forget about getting a job, turn it back over to God, and surrender his desire in the matter while staying open to what might happen. Then I got a week later, he recounted, well, the day after I surrendered wanting a job, nothing happened. Then I got a long distance phone call from my brother-in-law, and I'm going to be joining his firm. If it wasn't for my brother-in-law, I never would have gotten a job. It's a good thing I didn't wait for God. This is a good example of what the mind has a tendency to do. It was his own surrender, of course, that brought in the call from his brother-in-law. He so frantically desired the job that the desire was blocking the fulfillment of that goal. When he let go of wanting a job, it quickly appeared within 24 hours. But the propensity of the mind is to disown one's own power and project it elsewhere onto the world. This is why people in their own estimation think that they're powerless. They have the power, but they've merely projected it onto external forces. And we're going to do a different video about this in the future. But I really want you to consider the truth that all the power you think is out there, all of it, from politics to corporations to militaries to institutions to the pharmaceutical institution to the agriculture to all these different systems that we have in our world, and all that power that you think is out there, that's actually in you. That's a projection of your own mind, that you're projecting that power out. So that's some pretty deep stuff, so we'll go into that another time. The majority, going back, we are all powerful beings who have become unconscious of our own power. We've denied it and projected it onto others out of guilt and out of our own sense of smallness. And this is why it's so important to, from the very foundation of this letting go journey, we're dealing with the lowest emotions and moving our way up. Because if we're not dealing with those lower emotions, we're just like, you know what, I'm going to rush straight ahead. I'm just going to ignore my inner feelings of guilt and worthlessness. I'm going to go straight to success, make a name for myself, do some crazy shit in the world, and get what I want, basically. Warning, if you do that, you're going to make the same mistake that I did. And maybe you have to make that mistake before you're ready to do things differently. But what I can say is, if you haven't dealt with those lower levels of emotion, if you're more spiritually inclined, you might say, if you haven't done your shadow work, or you haven't cultivated your lower chakras and really got those sweet and down pat, doesn't matter how hard and fast you run into trying to become successful and get stuff in the world and become this amazing, powerful person, it's kind of like a rubber band is just going to flick you back. And the more you try and resist that, the more your health is going to decline, the more karma you're going to accumulate for yourself, until the inevitable point comes when this whole kingdom just topples and you go back to square one. And that's going to be a very painful lesson. So I encourage you, start working with this stuff from the foundation. Even if that means going back to the early videos that I shot and released, and really going over those and working with those emotions. The majority of what happens in our lifetime is the result of some decision we've made somewhere in the past, either consciously or unconsciously. Because this is so, it's very simple then to see our past decisions by looking at our life and tracking backwards. So you might wonder, where did all of this, this is not the life I wanted right now. I'm not living the life that I wanted, right? Well, start to go back and look at, where did you make the decision to be exactly where you are right now? And that'll really shock you. And again, we'll do more on that in the future. This principle is demonstrated by a woman who came for psychotherapy. She needed treatment because, in her own words, my relationships never work out. She had one satisfactory love affair after another and was always left feeling used and abused. She was full of resentment, self-pity, and depression. The problem, of course, was given in her opening sentence: my relationships never work out. Because we deny the power of our own mind, we don't see the glaringly obvious fact. It's very curious how we've become so unaware. Here's the woman who has the answer sitting right there in front of her, but she doesn't see that that's the answer. She really doesn't see the power of her own belief system. Our mind is so powerful that if we hold in mind a single thought, such as my relationships never work out, then that is most likely going to happen in our life. Our unconscious genie, which can only take orders and not make decisions, sees to it that our relationships don't work out. Of course, she got a little payoff from her disappointing relationship history. She got to experience self-pity, resentment, jealousy, envy, and all those gratifications that the small self feeds on endlessly. If we look at that small part of ourselves, we'll see this is the kind of thing in which it just loves to wallow. The small self glorifies in how miserable life is, how tough luck is, how rotten our experiences have been, and how mean people have been to us. But we pay a big price when we listen to this set of programs. The corollary is also obviously true. If our mind, by its decision, has the power to make negative things happen in our life, then it has equal power in the opposite, positive direction. We can choose all over again. This time we can choose the positive. We can cancel the old programs, and we can do that by beginning to relinquish the gratification we were getting out of the negative payoffs. So this journey of truth, this journey of becoming happier and freer in every imaginable way, starts with being honest with ourselves and looking at, well, I'm here because I've chosen it on some level, and because I've chosen the payoffs that I get by being here. Those negative things that our small self or our ego mind really milks for all it's worth. Now that we've looked at the subject a bit, we can come up with the term that most aptly describes this set of emotions: selfishness. If you want a definition of selfishness that really is going to serve your journey, that's it. The mere use of the word instantly sets up a resistance due to guilt. We all feel guilty because of selfishness. This puts us in an impossible position because in order to carry out what the world has taught us, we have to indulge in the very thing for which it then condemns us: selfishness, which is coming full circle back to the beginning of this video. To look at the subject, let's first make a decision that we're not going to beat ourselves up about it and get into the self-indulgence of guilt. That's what guilt really is, isn't it? Self-indulgence. Instead, let's look at the term selfishness as merely describing the collective motivations and modes of operation of the small self. That is a genetic aspect of the mind which, due to our own naivety, we allowed ourselves to be programmed with, and we are now resolved to deprogram in reverse, like the uninstall command on a computer. The reason to let go of selfishness is not because of guilt, not because it's wrong or because it's a sin, not because it's any of those things. All of these motivations come from lower consciousness and self-judgment. So we've got lower consciousness values and higher consciousness values, and all that guilt and self-recrimination is coming from those lower levels. That's not a good way to let go of selfishness. That will just, again, create a slingshot effect. Try and get forgiveness from God, do good work, and then bang, back to guilt and worthlessness because you haven't dealt with that root. Rather, the reason to let go of selfishness is simply because it's impractical. It doesn't work. It's too costly. It consumes too much energy. That's all. You know, when you're trying to be a dictator and you're at one point you're going to be fighting against, if not your own country for submission, then all these surrounding countries who can see that what you're doing there is obviously fucked up. And it's a continuous battle to try and maintain your power in that kind of situation. So why not just learn to cooperate and create opportunities for economic growth by trading with surrounding countries and bringing up the wealth of everyone? Isn't that a better solution? This is the reason and the motivation of letting go of selfishness, which will take us to higher levels. Selfishness delays the accomplishment of our goals and the realization of our wants. Because of its very nature, the small self is the creator of guilt and its self-perpetuator. That is, out of guilt we strive to accomplish and achieve success. Out of guilt. I've done that before and it was ugly. It was a horrible mess. Then when we achieve success, we feel guilty because we have it. It's exactly what happened. There is no winning of the guilt game. The only solution is to give it up and let it go. Our mind would like to make us think that guilt is laudatory, that the guilt mongers of the world love to make an idol of it. You know, look how guilty I am. I am a terrible person by nature. I deserve punishment. I am so great because I admit just what a guilty and shameful person I am. Which is more important, to feel guilty or to change for the better? If somebody owes us money, would we rather that they feel guilty about it or just pay us back the money? Obviously we want to just be paid. If we intend to feel guilty, we should at least consciously choose it instead of being unwittingly run by it. When we move from being selfish with a small s, we move into being selfish with a capital S, the big self. We move from our smaller self to our greater self. We move from weakness to power and from self-hatred and pettiness to lovingness and harmony. We move from strife to ease and from frustration to accomplishment. In summation then, instead of the motivation of selfishness and desire, we can much more effortlessly bring into our life that which we want by envisioning what we have, by envisioning what we wish to have happen. We do this by declaration of our intention, by acceptance, by decision, and by the act of consciously choosing. So that's it for this episode. I hope you got some real powerful keys from that. As you can see, it's really interesting. I don't know if you noticed this, but my whole energetic state as I'm going through these videos myself, I can actually feel it rising because, and this is one of the reasons I first got into sharing this kind of content back way when I was doing just more personal development stuff, is because when you teach something, it forces you to really get it yourself. And I'm not saying I do that perfectly, but this whole process for me has got me raking through this stuff with a fine-tooth comb, and I'm picking up so many more gems and nuggets than I would have before if I was just reading it myself. And I can feel myself changing, dealing with the bits of residue of fear and guilt and apathy and all these lower emotions and desire as I go through this, and it's really quite powerful. So I say that to help you to feel inspired by what's possible for you, that if you actually commit yourself to this path and don't just do it like a Zen devil, don't just do it as something that's just a bit of a hobby for you, but if you really want to get the benefits, which maybe you might not be ready for, and that's okay, maybe you're not ready to do this kind of work, but if you really want to reach those inner states of freedom, then be sincere about this stuff. Be sincere about this journey, and I can promise you it's going to pay off huge dividends. So I'll leave you with this exercise, which you can go and do and take this away and be practical with it, is to write down what are the top 3 things that you desire right now. And don't busy yourself too much with sitting there and trying to come up with things, but really just think in a very practical sense, what are 3 things that for whatever reason you want them in your life right now? Maybe it's a bit of extra money, maybe it's to start your own business or do better in your business, maybe it's a particular relationship, or maybe it's for your existing relationship to be way better than it is. What are those 3 things, the top? And then I just want you to focus on them one at a time and take a few minutes and sit there with your eyes closed and imagine that thing that you really want. And as you imagine it, notice in your body, where can you feel desire? Maybe it's in your solar plexus or your heart or in your root chakra, or maybe it's up here. And as you become conscious of that, start to allow the desire to be there. If there's any resistance to it being there, like you feel like it shouldn't be there, notice whereabouts in your body are you resisting it. Maybe you've got some tension in your throat or your chest that's in opposition to that desire feeling. And just start to notice those feelings around your particular desires, be conscious of them, acknowledge them, and just tell yourself, you know what, I accept this desire. I also accept that there's some guilt there as well. I can feel that somewhere else in my body. And I accept that guilt. I accept that feeling of smallness. And by doing that, just doing that for a few minutes initially, and then start to build it into your daily routine and your habits, you're very quickly going to see things shift very quickly as you clear out all of those emotions that are blocking you. So if you want some more detail about that, I'm going to shoot a whole episode about that, how to do this practice. This is very, very new stuff as far as I understand from what's being taught in the mainstream, even in spirituality, but especially in personal development. A very different way to look at getting the things that you want in your life. similar to the whole idea of manifestation, law of attraction, but there's some really subtle points in there that I've been able to discover that I'm going to be sharing with you soon. So get excited for that. All right, that's it for me. Make sure you hit the like button. If you're still here watching this, obviously you like something, or maybe you're just watching it so that you can think of ways to argue with me and tear down what I'm talking about here. Don't know. Leave me any comments. You've got questions. I'm really keen to see those. And also make sure you subscribe and share this with somebody. So I hope you have an amazing day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you on the next episode.